We are remembering Dolly Parton this morning. The country music legend died Tuesday in Nashville at 80. Her team says she passed peacefully after a brief battle with cancer.
Two names rarely shared the same headline for nearly a decade, until August 25, 2026, when Dolly Parton passed away at 80, and the man in the Oval Office responded in a way few people expected. For years, Donald Trump tried to honor her, and for years she quietly turned him down. So what actually happened between a president who wanted to give her the nation's highest civilian award and a singer who refused to let politics touch her name? Stick around, because the real story of their strange, respectful distance says more about both of them than any headline ever could. When politics first knocked on Dolly's door, long before anyone was talking about flags at half-staff, there was a much quieter story playing out behind closed doors in Washington. During his first term, Trump's administration twice attempted to award Dolly Parton the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the country's highest civilian honor, and twice she said no. Parton explained her reasoning in a 2021 interview, telling NBC's Today Show that she could not accept the first offer because her husband Carl Dean was ill at the time, and she turned down the second because she did not want to travel during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was not framed as a political statement, at least not on the surface. It was a woman choosing her family and her health over a ceremony in the nation's capital, a choice she confirmed in detail in an interview NPR later summarized, where she confirmed both offers came directly from the Trump White House. What made the story more interesting is what came next. Once Joe Biden took office, his administration also reached out about the same honor, and Parton hesitated again, this time for a different reason entirely. She told the Today Show that accepting the award under a new administration might make her look like she was picking a side, and picking sides was the one thing she had spent her entire career trying to avoid, no matter which party was doing the asking. A fact check published in the days after her death confirmed the full picture. Parton ultimately declined the medal 3 separate times across 2 administrations, twice from Trump and once from Biden, making her one of the rare public figures to turn down the same honor from presidents on opposite sides of the aisle. Even Barack Obama weighed in during a 2020 appearance on The Late Show, admitting on air that he considered it a mistake, calling it a screw-up on his part, that Parton never received the award while he was president, and joking that he would personally call Biden about it. That admission from a former president only added to the sense that Dolly Parton had somehow become the one honor every administration seemed eager to place around her name, and the one she repeatedly chose not to accept on the terms being offered. The contrast was striking, because Parton's reputation had never depended on political access or presidential connections. Her influence came from decades of music, philanthropy, songwriting, business ventures, and an ability to remain broadly admired without becoming permanently attached to one political camp. It is also worth noting how unusual that made her among the people Donald Trump did successfully honor with the Presidential Medal of Freedom during his first term. The recipients included retiring Utah Senator Orrin Hatch, former NFL player and Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page, and, posthumously, Elvis Presley himself. The inclusion of Presley creates an especially interesting parallel because, like Parton, he became far more than a musician. He became a cultural symbol whose influence reached well beyond the recording studio and stage. Yet Parton's relationship with presidential recognition remained noticeably different. Her reluctance was not necessarily a rejection of the honor itself, but part of a broader pattern in which she appeared careful about accepting political associations that could overshadow the work she had spent her life building. That distinction mattered. Parton had cultivated an image that crossed generational, regional, and political boundaries, allowing fans with very different beliefs to find something to admire in her story. By the time Trump's name became attached to her legacy in any meaningful way, That legacy was already firmly established. Her career had survived changing musical fashions, political controversies, cultural shifts, and decades of public scrutiny without requiring her to become an outspoken political figure. Her foundation had been built on music, generosity, and personal independence, rather than proximity to power. That made the next chapter particularly significant. Trump's attempts to associate his presidency with Parton placed her in a position where simply staying above the political conversation became increasingly difficult. A private refusal was one thing. A question posed publicly, with cameras watching and millions of people waiting for an answer, was something else entirely. And that was where Parton's carefully maintained distance from presidential politics was about to face its most visible test. The interview Trump could never get answered. If declining an award behind the scenes was easy, doing the same thing live on camera was another matter entirely. In 2018, ABC News correspondent David Wright sat down with Parton and pushed her repeatedly on the subject of Trump, a moment recounted years later in a broader look at her decades of political dodging. Wright even tried to draw a comparison between the president and the sexually abusive boss character Parton had famously played against in her 1980 film 9 to 5. Parton would not take the bait. She told Wright she was not addressing that, adding that she had learned a long time ago to keep her mouth shut if she wanted to stay in show business, and reminding him plainly that she was not in politics, she was an entertainer. When Wright pointed out that she was also a role model with genuine cultural influence, she simply agreed, saying yes she was, and explaining that was exactly why she chose not to talk about people in the first place. The comparison Wright was reaching for was not subtle. In 9 to 5, Parton's character worked under a boss named Franklin Hart, a man written specifically to be sexist, controlling, and dishonest, the kind of character audiences were meant to despise from his very first scene. Asking Parton whether the sitting president reminded her of a role she had played 4 decades earlier was about as direct as a reporter could get, without simply asking her to say his name in a negative sentence. And she still would not give him the answer he was fishing for. That interview became something of a blueprint for how she would handle every Trump-related question for the rest of her career. 2 years later, speaking with USA Today, she said she refused to get caught up in political things because she had roughly as many Republican fans as Democratic ones, and did not want to offend either group by picking a side in a fight that was not hers to referee. She added that America had given everyone free speech, but that came with the responsibility of being accountable for whatever you chose to say and do with it. Her family history gave her the perfect line to sum it all up, one she used for years whenever reporters pushed too hard on where she really stood. She would joke that her father was a Republican, her mother was a Democrat, and that made her a hypocrite, deliberately mispronouncing the word so it sounded like Hippocrat instead. It got a laugh nearly every time, and it also happened to be true in the most literal sense. A household split right down the middle long before Trump was ever part of the conversation. She expanded on that philosophy in a 2021 conversation with People magazine, explaining that she knew whatever she said would be listened to closely and turned into something bigger than she intended, so she had to be careful with her words. She added that of course she had her own opinions, but she was not an opinionated person as a rule, believing that faith and personal belief were meant to be tools rather than weapons people used against each other. It was a philosophy that applied just as much to Trump as it did to any other polarizing figure who tried to pull her into the conversation. That careful balancing act held up through Trump's first term, his years out of office, and his return to the White House. But it was tested in ways that revealed just how deliberate her neutrality actually was, especially once a global health crisis gave both of them a reason to intersect in a way neither one had planned. A quiet assist during Trump's first term. Not every connection between Parton and Trump involved an interview or an award ceremony. In April 2020, in the early and uncertain weeks of the coronavirus pandemic, Parton donated $1 million to Vanderbilt University Medical Center to help fund early research into a possible vaccine, a gift that was later credited with playing a real role in the development of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine. That donation became known as the Dolly Parton COVID-19 Research Fund, and it directly supported the work of Dr. Mark Dennison, whose lab at Vanderbilt used her contribution to help build the testing methods researchers needed to confirm the vaccine was triggering a strong immune response, a process explained thoroughly by the Philanthropy Roundtable. The federal government later poured roughly $1 billion of its own funding into Moderna's vaccine effort as part of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed program, meaning Parton's early philanthropy and the president's signature pandemic initiative ended up supporting the very same project, even though neither side ever framed it that way publicly. Parton never used the moment to praise or criticize the administration overseeing that funding. When asked about her motivation later, she said simply that she felt led to help because she knew something bad was on the rise, and that she considered her contribution a small part of a much bigger effort. She later admitted in an interview with a UK radio station that she probably got more credit than she deserved for the vaccine's success, insisting her heart simply led her toward doing what she felt she was supposed to do at the time. That modesty did not stop the donation from becoming a small political flashpoint of its own once it resurfaced online, with commentators arguing over how much credit belonged to her philanthropy versus how much belonged to the federal dollars the Trump administration poured into the same research through Operation Warp Speed. Parton stayed out of that argument entirely, just as she stayed out of every other one involving the president, letting the science speak for itself, while the internet debated who deserved the bigger share of the applause. Nuts, hypocrites, and the greatest show in Washington. By the time the 2016 election rolled around, Parton had already perfected the art of saying just enough to satisfy reporters without ever actually taking a side. When comments she made about Hillary Clinton were interpreted by some outlets as an endorsement, she moved quickly to clarify that she had not endorsed anyone, a clarification documented in the Knoxville News Sentinel's long-running coverage of her political dodges. Asked directly to weigh in on the matchup between Clinton and Trump, she called the entire race the greatest show on television, and described both candidates as nuts, a line that let her acknowledge the chaos of the moment without endorsing either person in it. It was classic Parton, funny enough to make headlines, vague enough to avoid controversy, and delivered with just enough charm that almost nobody pushed back on it. That same instinct carried into her later years, even when her own choices put her neutrality under a microscope in a very different way. In 2023, she released a duet with conservative musician Kid Rock on her Rockstar album, and faced backlash from fans who felt the collaboration clashed with her carefully maintained image. She told The Hollywood Reporter, in comments Rolling Stone later expanded on, that loving her did not mean she could not also work with someone else, and that she preferred to accept people rather than condemn them outright for their politics or their mistakes. She tied the whole philosophy back to her Christian faith, arguing that people deserve forgiveness rather than permanent judgment. Even the idea of running for office herself, an idea plenty of celebrities have flirted with over the years, got a hard no from Parton whenever it came up. Speaking to Metro in 2023, in comments later relayed by People magazine, she joked that the country had already had enough boobs in the White House, and said she simply was not qualified for that kind of job, adding that she preferred to make her difference through music instead of legislation. Reporters kept trying anyway, year after year, because a direct political opinion from someone as universally beloved as Parton would have been a genuinely valuable headline. Every single time, she found a new joke, a new deflection, or a new gentle correction that let her stay exactly where she wanted to be, adored by people who otherwise agreed on almost nothing else about the state of the country. For nearly a decade, that was the entire relationship between Dolly Parton and Donald Trump. an offer made and declined, a question asked and deflected, a joke told instead of an opinion given, and one quiet philanthropic overlap that neither side ever tried to spin. Nobody could have predicted that the moment their names would finally be linked in a headline together, in the biggest way, would come not from an award ceremony or a campaign trail, but from a hospital in Nashville. The day the flags came down for Dolly Parton died on August 25, 2026, at the Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville, after what her publicist Marcel Parisot described as a brief battle with cancer, according to reporting from NBC News. Her nephew and longtime head of security, Brian Seaver, confirmed the news in a video posted to her social media accounts, saying the sadness belonged to those left behind and not to Dolly herself, and tributes began pouring in almost immediately from across the entertainment and political worlds. Trump's response came quickly, and it stood in sharp contrast to the years of careful distance that had defined their public relationship while she was alive. He posted a tribute on Truth Social, calling her one of the greatest country singers ever, and describing her death as a true loss for millions of people, a message reported in full by Yahoo Entertainment. He wrote that there had never been anyone like her, and there never would be again, closing the message by telling her to rest in peace, and adding that the world loved her. What made the moment stand out even more was the formal gesture that came with it. The White House issued a proclamation ordering flags at the White House, federal buildings, military posts, embassies, and naval vessels to be lowered to half-staff beginning that same evening at 6 o'clock, remaining down through sunset on September 1, 2026, a full week of national mourning, detailed by Atlanta News First. It was a level of formal national recognition that Parton had spent years politely avoiding while she was alive, arriving only after she was gone. That gesture also fit a pattern Trump had already established during his second term. Less than a year earlier, in September 2025, he had ordered flags lowered nationwide to honor Charlie Kirk, a political activist rather than an office holder, showing that Trump had grown willing to extend this presidential discretion to cultural and political figures well beyond the traditional list of presidents, vice presidents, and members of Congress. Applying that same discretion to Parton, an entertainer who had spent her entire life insisting she wanted nothing to do with politics, was a striking twist that even some longtime observers of presidential mourning proclamations found notable. The reaction extended well beyond the president himself. A roundup of tributes compiled by CBS News showed Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn calling her an iconic leader who loved her state and nation, while fellow Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty described her as talented beyond compare and an entrepreneurial juggernaut. Republican Representative Diana Harshbarger, who represents the Sevier County district where Parton was raised, said that, no matter how big her star got, she never stopped being one of their own. Fellow musicians including Reba McEntire, Dionne Warwick, and Casey Musgraves shared their own personal tributes, alongside actress Julia Roberts, who had starred alongside Parton in Steel Magnolias, and called her a magical and joyous human being. Trump was far from the only political figure to weigh in, and the bipartisan nature of the mourning underscored just how effective Parton's decades of studied neutrality had actually been. Former President Bill Clinton posted his own tribute, remembering that she rose high from her East Tennessee roots and never forgot where she came from, praising her lifelong commitment to giving back, particularly through her literacy efforts. Seeing a Republican president ordering flags lowered nationwide, while a Democratic former president offered his own separate, heartfelt statement on the very same day, only reinforced the point Parton had been making for decades, that her music and her generosity belonged to everyone, regardless of party. It is worth remembering that Parton spent her entire public life trying to stay out of exactly this kind of political spotlight, turning down honors, dodging interview traps, and joking her way past every question about where her loyalties actually stood. In the end, it was not an award ceremony or an endorsement that finally brought Trump and Parton's names together in the history books in a lasting way. It was a flag lowered in her honor, a tribute written after she could no longer decline it, and a nation, regardless of political stripe, pausing together to remember a woman who spent her whole career refusing to choose a side. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.